talk to me, if you could, please, a little bit about cannabis and that discussion and, because I've been doing a lot of research on it in other states, and it is a huge economic factor in many other states. And I just want to remind everyone that we have a town meeting at 7:30 that we will break for no matter where we're at. But, it's not just an economic issue, and it's kind of, I think it's controversial here, or 50-50. You hear some people say, yes, we should be doing it. Other people say, no, not in Ridgefield. P&Z passed a moratorium last week for 1 year. I don't know if it's coming over here or not. I'm assuming it is, John, based on Mr. Katz, a member of Planning and Zoning, is here. And how we're going to handle it, we can discuss that. But give me your feed on that. What's the state looking at long term? And the second part of the question has to do with the Social Equity Council, is it?
Mm-hmm.
And it says that I think 25% of the tax revenue needs to be spent in the rehab area.
Yes.
But
That's of state money, not local
the
money.
state tax revenue
Yes,
goes
the state
to
tax goes
our mental health addiction services. And it said currently it's at $1 million to $4 million, which isn't nearly anywhere near the $200 million. If you take 25% the first year, that's a lot more money. Were you in on those conversations at all?
Well, I wasn't at the table per se for that. We spent a lot of time pushing back as a caucus on some of the initial proposals, and what the governor wanted, what our caucus wanted, what the other side of the aisle wanted tended to be three different things. And so all of this was done with a lot of compromise. And so you talked about the future of this and when alcohol began to be regulated and there were policies put in place, what those looked like then versus what they look like now is not even close. And so we are of the understanding that we are going to learn as we go. We do have the one advantage, though, of having the other states that have legalized and the policies that they have put in place. And so we took, through data, what was the best practice for each of these states and applied that. There were people from the Equity Council who wanted a higher percentage of the licenses to go to an equity applicant. An equity applicant has a lot of criteria to meet in order to be an applicant for that license, but what they must, ultimately the goal is to give licenses to those who have been hit hardest by the war on drugs, by the banning of marijuana, by whatever policy each state has.
It's an interesting perception, I'll put it that way.
Well, we can
That you're
you and I can have
allowing
a couple hour
drugs to
meeting
a
on that.
community that's been hit hardest by drugs, unless you feel
I
that
think that's an
marijuana is
interest-
not a drug.
I think that's an interesting spin. I mean, if you think that alcohol is not a drug,
Yeah, it
then-
is, but I think we should learn and not necessarily continue down the path and rationalize it by mistakes we've made in the past.
okay. So
We can go on and on all
yeah,
that.
I guess I shouldn't fire questions back at you. That's not really what we're
You can.
No, I think that what we need to know is what the policy looks like right now, what the bill looks like, what the legislation looks like, is not what it's going to look like probably 5 years from now. The Equity Council will give feedback. The addiction services groups. I don't know if you watched the outreach event that I did last week, but I had a gentleman from the Marijuana Policy Project who is extremely well versed in the ins and outs of policy, and he was the first person that I spoke to when I first tried to figure out whether or not I could support this legislation. And the two biggest criteria, I will tell you, for me, when deciding whether or not I would support, which I did ultimately vote for this. Is it a perfect bill? Absolutely not. Is it a perfect law that was passed? certainly not. But it did more good than harm, for sure. And the two things that were most important to me were that there was an increase in funding for addiction services. That was number one. And the, actually, number one and number one. The other one, which was just as important for me, was that there was that equity piece. Because if all of a sudden the target of marijuana came in and opened up big stores across the state and there was no access, what justice is there for families who have members who come out of prison because of cannabis violations, and now they can't profit off of this new legal practice. So that's...
So, can I just add?
Yeah.
The way you described that raises a question. When you look at kind of an equity applicant, is it someone who personally, like, yes, I was personally, or is it someone who looks like somebody in general? Right?
It's
I meet criteria that I.
So it is either that, someone who was actually affected by that, or it also has to do with the demographics of the community. So it was, rather than going with specific people and saying, yes, you can apply, and you can apply, and you can apply, it became about the community. So if you had lived in a community that is, has been determined to be one of these areas that is, that was more, had a greater percentage who were in prison for cannabis violations. If you had lived there for the first 10 years of your life, or if you had lived there for the last 10. And the criteria is, it goes deep. There are a lot of ways to qualify, so it doesn't eliminate anyone. But if you have a violation and you live in Ridgefield and you come from a household where your parents make $250,000, but you serve time for a cannabis violation, you do qualify as an equity. Because there was a danger in eliminating people too for their, if you were arrested when you had no money and now you make money, should you be penalized, should you not qualify? So these are sort of the conversations that were happening at that table.
I mean, I understand the decriminalization piece of it, but I'm just wondering, because we haven't had the discussion, or I haven't heard the discussion yet on I've heard a lot of the con side. I mean, I've listened to DCDC had a very good presentation, you had your presentation. I thought the planning and zoning was going to do more of was going to be more of a public hearing last time, but it wasn't really, it was more on the moratorium.
Yeah.
But was there time spent on the cons, the negatives, the negative impacts that a community could suffer and people could suffer from in this legalization or starting to, promote retail space?
So the conversation about, the cons is always about a drug, about addiction, for sure. I would say
but it's kind of slept off. I mean, it's marijuana. It's not.
It certainly wasn't slept off in our conversations.
Okay, good.
That was a very serious piece of it. And I don't have a colleague who I know personally who I had a conversation with on either side of the aisle who wasn't concerned about addiction services.
Okay.
Every single person was that I spoke to.
So there was time spent talking to people from the addiction side of this aisle that it's serious consequences for people that get involved with drugs.
Yes, and there were very real conversations about how people will often say, well, you don't know any heroin addict who didn't start with marijuana. But the logic in that, there's a very small percentage, it's less than 1% of people who start smoking marijuana or ingesting cannabis in any manner and actually move on to anything harder. And we have many more people who are addicted to alcohol in this country than we do who are addicted to cannabis.
That's my point. Are we heading down that same road?
Well, data hasn't shown that increase in the states that have legalized.
It's too early.
Perhaps, but we've got 5 years in Colorado, and it's...
So what I hear you saying, Amy, is that there's been a lot of serious thought that's been given to the addiction piece. So everybody took it seriously. was discussing, and they ultimately concluded that it's not a problem?
That what is not a problem?
Addiction.
No one said that addiction is not a problem. That's why we put money into addiction services.
So we're gonna legalize something, and then we're gonna put money into it to support the people that have adverse effects to it, like addiction or crying or things like that.
Just like we do with alcohol. So that's the conversation that you have to be prepared to have too, when you open this up to, so this is an addictive substance, and we are concerned about anyone who has access to this substance. Are we as concerned about those who have alcohol, have access to alcohol?
I submit to you that, I mean, there's a lot of us that are concerned about
And I'm with you.
alcohol and addiction and, you know, drunk driving. We've lost how many young high school kids to, you know, car accidents as a result of addiction.
But statistically, you will find that is alcohol-related accidents that are taking lives and not cannabis-related.
Well, that's what
But
I'm
this
saying.
is the
How do
product,
they-
you
That's what I'm
read,
saying.
you read both sides.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great question, and that was a conversation that we also had, because even I got stuck in that, was, well, there's no roadside test.
Right.
But there isn't for heroin, and there isn't for cocaine, and there isn't for, so police are trained, and there is money for training, for further training in police departments to be able to recognize that, just as they would. It just, the science doesn't exist to be able to get a breathalyzer on
I spoke to Chief Price
this.
about it. He said that they can identify.
Yes, he knows.
And blood tests.
Yes, that's exactly what he said to me. And blood test is after the fact. It's just you don't have the roadside
Right.
ability to test, but you do have that blood test.
I had a
Yes.
similar conversation with him, and he said the same, you know, it's not just, you know, the blood test after, you know, there's obviously, you know, well, if someone's smoking, there's, you know, a smell, if you look in their eyes, you know, redness in eyes, you know, there's a series of factors you can look into to say, you know, does this suggest, does this lead to, right, something where.
And that's part of the discourse that we need to be aware of, that all people are listening to us, regardless of age. And if we put forth the position that, you know, the police cannot determine if you're using cannabis or not, then I don't want young people to think that, okay, this is great, you know,
Because they could get away
can.
with it,
And that's why I
right.
brought it up, that they can. And Sean, you spoke with the chief, and it's not as if you're gonna skate free, that there's no issue. They can tell and bring you in. And give you a ticket for being, you know, driving while under the influence, not alcohol, but the substance.
And there are specific regulations for underage in this bill as well. So it is just as there are with alcohol. It
Right.
is,
An underage drinking.
yeah,
Mhm.
yes. So
What
that is
else?
just-
Anything else for Amy outside of that? Next is a cannabis retail. The reason this is on the agenda is just to let everyone know, as I'm sure you already do, I sent you the moratorium that was passed by Planning and Zoning last Tuesday. Right. And so it is a moratorium for 1 year, and you all had an opportunity to read it. And I think we need to take the ball now and begin discussion, but Becky mentioned to me during the, thank you, Wendy, I think one of the, at the last meeting that, or she stated that she then wanted to have follow-up meetings with me as first selectman to talk about.
I believe she does, yes.
Okay, so I will go ahead and have a meeting with her, but I think what we heard that first public hearing was that it was more of a policy decision than a land use decision. But when it comes to, that's relative to whether we allow a retail outlet in Ridgefield or not. What about the
Land use,
cultivation
if you
part of
say
it?
yes to it,
The same thing with cultivation, right?
yes.
Okay.
But I don't think we've had a clear public hearing,
No, we
let the
haven't.
public
No,
come in
well,
and discuss this
We
yet.
definitely need to start thinking
You know,
about it.
Right.
that's what we said.
You know, we have a year, but that doesn't mean we wait a year
No.
and do it at the last
No.
minute, that we have to schedule several of these public hearings, as many as we feel the public would like to have, whether we do it on a Wednesday night or a Saturday morning or some other nights of the week to give everyone an opportunity.
Maybe in person, maybe a Zoom one.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yep. Yep.
And I
can
think
talk to Andrew about that.
I know that I asked Amy the question also, I haven't, and I know that it will be substance abuse and addiction counselors that probably would be the con side of this, but I think that we should.
Necessarily.
Well,
No, right.
No, but I'm just saying, for
Business.
education, we might want to have the other side to, I felt like the
Well, if we're gonna
ECDC side was
have-
all business
Well,
and,
that was presentations. I
Right.
think we want to hear from the public.
okay,
Not necessarily a presenter that's going to, and maybe that's what the public wants, and we'll hear that can educate relative one side or the other, the benefits, the pluses, minuses.
I think that'd be
SWOT
helpful for us.
analysis.
Yeah.
To have, you know,
You want to do that first?
maybe it's
Yeah.
good to have a education first and then have the
And
discussion.
a public hearing.
Exactly,
forum.
yeah.
Right, right.
Not too lengthy, but,
Not sure, because I know some of the people who I've talked to that are very strong advocates of that, the implicit assumption is people are not educated, they're not informed, there's a lot of biases, and I think that's a fair point. But a lot of us kind of came into that, so, I'm trying to do some of my own research, and, the more, we can bring in, some of those experts. I did sort of feel, I don't know about anybody else, that with the ECDC and the session last week on Tuesday, you have someone from the Marijuana Policy Institute. They come in with a perspective, right?
What is the Marijuana Policy Institute?
So my recollection from the person who, as he introduced himself or was introduced, was that it is a group that's been together for about 25 years that works to advocate for state legislatures to, have laws that allow for marijuana.
It's a lobbying group?
Yeah.
Okay.
Essentially, that's what it sounds like, yeah.
Okay.
So that's a perspective. I think I've said this before. I've done a decent amount of research, and a little bit more now. It's very hard to find true scholarly research that comes right. I found now some for the basic. I can forward you a couple of these links that I've gone through.
Yeah, well, you can forward to all of us.
Yeah, to everyone.
Remember the book we got from the guy who came in to talk?
The book?
We got a book about marijuana.
There's something you had sent around that was like impacts under 18.
Yeah, I can, let me look
We
in
had-
here. The last thing I sent around was just a quick overview of the law.
Right.
I highlighted
Oh, yeah.
the points that I think were most important without getting into all the detail. But for example, this report here, Schenken, is a report that goes to the liquor industry, but they've started writing this individual about the cannabis.
Mhm.
And from an economic development, I'll just read one paragraph. Tallying sales figures from California, Washington, Colorado, Oregon, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Nevada. Tax revenue from cannabis has grown vertiginously. Have you heard that word? Vertiginously, V-E-R-T-I-G-I-N.
That's a lot.
Hmm?
Means a lot, right?
Does it
A
mean
lot,
exponentially?
since 17, when the same 7 states combined for a full year haul of $697 million in tax revenue in 2017. The $1 billion barrier was broken with 2018's haul of $1.2 billion, followed by $1.66 billion in 19, and a 57% jump to $2.6 billion in all of 2020. The half-year figures put the 7 states to track to exceed $3 billion in tax revenue by the end of this year. So from an economic, pure business economic development, this is an industry that we're seeing taking off. So you put that in the parking lot, that's the economics of it. And I think that's what the state, and I was looking for some of that discussion, so I have this. This is an overview from the Western Connecticut Council of Governments. Let's see, retail, this is the letter that you all had from Ms. Mancini. This is Colorado, sales by the numbers. 2018, they had 509 dispensaries. They produced, I don't know what it was, medical cultivations, these are the number of various medical cultivating they had, and then the sales. And you can see how it is, it's growing, right? If you're interested in that, West Cog. I'm looking for what I may have sent you, Sean. And it may not be in here. That's the SB, and then there's the zoning. Employers, that's an issue for us as a municipality, because we operate under federal law, and therefore we cannot condone the use, and
Right.
it's still in our policy book that's being
Federal.
updated. We ran that through the attorneys.
Did I see something in the state law that said you can't knock someone on a job for testing positive in a drug test when it's legal?
But
No, we can't.
federally, it's not.
Yeah.
Well,
You know, we operate under federal law, and according to Human Resources, and checked with our council, we can, in our policy book, if you test positive for any kind of a substance,
Mhm.
alcohol,
Yeah, yeah,
marijuana,
mhm.
anything, those are grounds for termination. We don't terminate the first one, it's a warning,
Sure,
et cetera.
mhm.
But yes, we can terminate. Well, especially with police, fire.
Sure.
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
You don't want people responding, that may be, and.
Well, any of
under-
the highway
under
department,
any
you don't want people
Yeah.
operating big
driving
machinery.
heavy
No.
equipment,
Yeah.
Trucks.
Well,
And
especially
then
that
this
stays in your
was,
system longer, that, you know, it's one thing you have alcohol, you have a drink, you know, before it, that's obvious, but you could have, you know, use something
right,
2 weeks ago on vacation and,
and this stays with you though, right, right. And then this was the medical perspective from Rudy Bruggles, I think you all got.
Oh, yes, we did get
Uh-huh.
that,
Yes, yes.
That
yes.
was
That was
kind of
what-
up here,
yeah.
but you could pick.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was very good.
Yeah.
His statements out of there, so, I don't know if I'm covering what you were asking.
no, that's fine, and again, I'll forward through, you know, some of the ones that I've seen. But I think it's like, to Maureen's point, some level of education for the community, the different perspectives, and then hearing from the community
Yes.
at different times.
Okay,
I think, you know,
so,
give them a couple venues
Yeah.
to come and, because really we haven't had any public input at all.
so proceeding along that line, I don't, if we do it, we don't want to be considered favoring one side or the other, right? We
Right.
have to have it be down the road and balanced each and every time.
Absolutely, that's what we want.
Right,
We want
so
to hear,
we can start with, I don't even know, I'll find out and send it by the
well, maybe we could start with, you know, a call for, you know, people in the community who have, you know, who are.
other communities.
Mhm.
You mean people here in our
Well, I was saying, you
community?
can ask people, you know, who have some kind of relevant experience.
I'd like to see, you know, experts come in and talk about both sides, whether it's doctors, police, you know, mental health, you know,
Addiction
whatever.
counselors,
I'm sorry?
addiction counselors?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear from the experts, and then when we bring the public in, you know, we could be armed, or they should be armed with, you know, information, not hearsay,
Mhm.
but, and then they can make their own decisions whether or not
Mhm.
it's, you know, it's right for them, or if it's right for, you know, for Ridgefield.
Okay.
I mean, people are gonna be able to, you know, indulge if they want, but it's a question ultimately that we're gonna decide, is this the right thing for Ridgefield?
And then ultimately, do we want to bring a question to a referendum? For example, on next May, during the budget referendum, do we add a question? That's food for thought, you don't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's think
Tonight.
about that.
I would just be, just for whatever it's worth, I'd be a little nervous about something if it's non-binding, I guess,
Yeah.
right, you know, because the worst thing you wanna do is
It's
have.
the wording. Did
Well-
people understand the question?
Well, do they understand the question, and then, are we just gonna say whatever, you know, the vote comes, if it's 51%, 49%, or are we gonna just say, okay?
Yeah.
Or is that, you know, more input for us? That's, I just wanna make sure we're setting the
So
right
like the budget
expectation.
referendum, they
And-
pass it or,
Right.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
Is
and
it
we
up
should-
or down?
you know,
What you're saying is that if a vote were to come in 51-49, right? do you say, well, wait a minute, the separation wasn't enough, it's too close? We don't do that with the budget, to Bob's point. So do we want to do it here? How do, that all has
That's
to
right,
be.
yeah. Well, I guess the question is whether it's binding or non-binding.
And how many people voted also?
Right.
You know, is it a big turnout, not a big turnout? Look at how low the turnout can be sometimes.
And
But
maybe
yeah,
that's just apathy, people don't care.
Right, it could be.
And we go through
Just
that with our
something to think
budget
about.
sometimes.
Yeah.
We do.
But I think if we're going to do a referendum, we have to take it with a very serious thought.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I know that Becky had mentioned on that public hearing with the moratorium last week that she thought that the Board of Selectmen thought we were going to put it on a vote.
Yeah.
And
She talked that way, yeah, like
Yeah.
that was a done deal, which I didn't think it was.
No.
And it may be, but,
No.
yeah, we
Well-
have.
well, I was confused by the whole
The Board of
evening,
Selectmen is the only board that can call a
Yes,
referendum or a
right.
town meeting. So
because I thought it was
it's got
going to be
that.
more of a public hearing, and they made it perfectly clear. It was really just on moratorium.
Well, that's how zoning is, it's specific to the regulation.
It's a statutory board.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think we can make a
So we'll go ahead and
decision.
proceed looking to, I asked the Prevention Council last week on Wednesday, there was a vigil up under the tent, which is down now. And I asked the question, where do we go? Where's the Ridgefield Prevention Council on this? Where is the Ridgefield Community Coalition Against Alcohol and Substance Abuse on this? Because even within the medical community and the counselors,
Mhm.
there's a thought that medical marijuana can be a benefit to people, for example, with anxiety, rather than being on a benzodiazepine,
Mhm.
that they can get that consistency, et cetera, and be able to function on a regular basis. So you have those positives and negatives that
Well, we
I
have
think
medical marijuana.
We do.
we
So,
do.
Yeah.
We do, yeah.
So
We
this
do.
is purely recreational.
Recreation.
That's right.
Yeah, so
Right.
I don't think medical marijuana is part of the
No,
discussion
it's-
at this point.
Yeah, I just agree with Bob, like, we need to be focused, right? It's so easy, you can very
Yes.
quickly get onto, teenagers, and we've got laser, retail, recreation,
21 and older.
I don't know.
Right, okay. So we'll start working on that and look at something in 60 days, possibly the first one.
Okay.
Well, we have an election coming up, and then we have holidays. So in between there somewhere, maybe the
I would
first,
think,
second week of
I'll
December.
think about too, like people or a forum that we can, different types of forums that we
Yeah.
might be able to,
Okay.
that would encourage all of us to do that.
And I think
The
that
types of people,
we don't
the
want to put it
skill
off
set.
too, I think we should do it sooner rather than later, because I think people are interested in what the discussion is going to be. And if, I'm,
But Rudy's right, if people are gone for the holidays or focused on.
yeah, but it's only September.
Yeah, I know, so we have October. And are we going to be looking to have a vote in October?
Oh, no,
No,
I-
no, no.
And what I said in the beginning, we have a year.
We have a year.
So I can see having a forum or a public hearing in October at some point.
Yeah,
Right.
But also, how many do we want to do? We'll get a feeling for it once we do the first round.
right,
We'll get a very good idea.
yeah, I think you're right.
And even if it's early
I wanna-
November, I don't, it's not like people are taking off early November for
No,
holidays and all
they might
that.
not be traveling who knows?
Oh, they're playing
Okay,
for-
well, thank
I-
you.
Yeah,
Next is board committees and commissions.